Good morning. Thank you for joining us. This webinar will cover the new rules updates for the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. And I just want to mention that please enter your questions in the Q&A chat function. If you can't find that, it will be on your toolbar. There will be three dots if you don't see it, and there will be a Q&A icon, and you can enter your questions there. Okay, this slide represents our agency purpose. If you don't know anything about Commerce, Commerce manages a portfolio of work that strengthens communities across the state. We cover everything from housing and homelessness to economic development. Our program is part of the Energy Division. We strive to meet our state's energy goals by providing resources and opportunities and implementing the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. So equity is the forefront of our work, and we want to ensure all people in Washington can benefit from our programs. So our goal today in this presentation is we want to share updates with the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. So as a result of the 2025-2026 rulemaking, many of you participated in that. We'd like to thank you for your participation and your input, all your comments that you've submitted. The goal for today is for you to understand the increased flexibility these new rules provide through options and allowances. Since we're limited on time, we're not gonna dive into too much of the details of the requirements, but or of the existing standard, but kind of just the new ones. And if you're unfamiliar with the basics, please join us on for Clean Buildings 101. That's July 22nd, and then at the end of this presentation, you'll see the dates and the link will be shared. As a disclaimer, we're still in rulemaking. It's going to be official once our CR 103 is filed. So what you'll be seeing, there will be no more changes to it. This is what will be filed with our CR 103. I wanted you to just be upfront about that. We completed our comment period and our public hearing, and Commerce took all of those comments. We've reviewed them carefully, and we made necessary adjustments to our proposed rules that was filed with our CR 102. We consulted with our AAG. You can see these revisions in what we call the concise explanatory statement. That'll be available when the CR 103 is filed. So just look out for that. For any of these announcements, clearly you can go to our website, or you can subscribe to our bulletin on our website. So for today's agenda, I'll cover a little bit of background. Luke will cover the performance targets of the new rules, any updates to existing rules, the exceptions, extensions, and other notable updates and upcoming training. Okay. Here's that background information I promised you. As a result of the Clean Buildings Law that was authorized in 1257, we have the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. The Clean Buildings Performance Standard is based on ASHRAE Standard 100, which covers energy efficiency in existing buildings. So this is the reference standard. Commerce took that standard. We developed amendments through rulemaking to conform with the clean buildings legislation. These amendments can be found under WAC 19450. I think it'd be best for you to reference what we call the integrated document, the Clean Buildings Performance Standard integrated document. Commerce worked with ASHRAE to incorporate all the state amendments into Standard 100. A link can be found in our website, and I believe they're going to put it in the chat, link to the integrated document. If you've ever been to ASHRAE's website or downloaded any of their standards, there's a cost to it. Ours is free of charge. So the requirement applies to Tier 1 buildings, which are buildings over 50,000 square feet. And Tier 2 buildings, which are between 20 and 50, and all multifamily greater than 20,000 square feet. There's a section in our standard that applies to decarbonizing district energy systems. This is mandatory for state-owned campus district energy systems. So this law charged us, Commerce, with rulemaking, notifying building owners, administering incentives, supporting mandatory compliance. So I just want to show this brief slide, just kind of the difference between tier one, tier two. You can kind of see the size difference. Tier one doesn't include multifamily. The requirements, again, tier two does not have a performance target. When Luke goes over the performance target section of this webinar, most of that applies to tier one. So just keep that in mind if you're if you're a tier two building owners. Um, and then, the compliance schedule varies, but just know that it's different cohorts staggered between the years, and it's a 5-year cycle. So for tier two, July 1st, 2027. There's some misunderstanding, some misinformation out there where some people think that it was this past June. It's actually July 1st, 2027. And here's the rest of Tier 1 and the compliance schedule. Okay, so the rulemaking began because of the House Bill 1543 was signed into law last year. It's a result of the Clean Buildings Work Group that occurred the year before, which included some recommendation to meet some to make changes to make the standard a little bit more flexible to support building owners. So the bill contained the authority to create and adopt compliance pathways, alternative compliance pathways to the Clean Buildings Performance Standard, just to provide greater flexibility, the ability to grant timeline extensions to building owners working hard towards compliance, and the additions of exemption categories. So here is the breakdown of the Clean Buildings Performance Standard by section. Not all of them, but for the most part, the main ones. You'll see sometimes when you open up the standard, you'll see informative and there's normative annexes. Just know that informative provides helpful information, but not required. The normative section is required. We always suggest that if you are new to the standard, reading it and you just download it for the first time, read normative annex Z or Y first. If you're a tier one building owner, go to Z, review that, and then kind of look through the rest of the standard to help you kind of look at the different requirements. Once we get the rules codified, we will be publishing a new version of the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. As you can see, I kind of crossed out the July 2024. That's the current version. We hope to have either July 2026 or August 2026 version. We'll be sure to announce it in our bulletin, have it on our website, and anyone who's ever downloaded, we are sure to email them and let them know that there's a new version out. And one of the big things I want to show you here is that there's a new section in the standard that we've added. It's Informative Annex B. And this essentially just kind of lists all the compliance pathways, making things a little bit easier to see the different options out there. We hope that you'll find that helpful. And then so also you'll find in the beginning are the terms and definitions of the standard. We've updated quite a few. There's updated terms where we've updated definitions just a little bit, whether it's a word or the whole thing. So for example, qualified energy manager, we've included in the qualification an individual participating in some type of full-time fellowship where they're working with a QP, QEM, QEA for at least 6 months, and they help them produce a successful compliance application. So we know there's a lot of programs, workforce development programs that are working to support the standard, and it helps if they are a qualified energy manager. So, and then we have new terms like authorized representatives. We kind of use that pretty often, and now we want to make sure that we have it defined within the standard. And then all of these new terms and definitions will be on Section 3 of the Clean Buildings Performance Standard. And then I'm going to hand this off to Luke. To,
Sutherland.
okay.
All right. So, actually, if we could first start by going back to your definition slide, I wanted to point out a couple since we have it up. We use acronyms often in our lives these days. So, Annalyn used the terms QEA, QP. Um, uh, you can see that we've added those acronyms to the standards so folks can reference them if they need to. I also wanted to point out that we have new definitions for expected useful life and remaining useful life. These are important definitions when folks are pursuing the investment criteria. Um, Compliance pathways. So if you are a building owner consultant utilizing the investment criteria, make sure you take a look at these definitions to help you successfully pursue that pathway. Next slide. Maybe it's next couple slides. Yeah, go ahead and move on to the next one. Great. Okay, so we are now referring to all the compliance pathways for tier one buildings as performance targets rather than energy targets. It's a better defining term for the new inclusion of the new alternative compliance pathways. So starting with the two existing performance pathways or performance targets, most of you are probably already familiar. For tier one, you need to either meet the energy use intensity target or the investment criteria, the standard. For those two pathways, there are a couple notable changes. One is for meeting the EYT. If you have a newly constructed building, the term is technically a more recently built building. This is a building built to the 2015 Washington State Energy Code or newer energy code. These buildings have to have a target that's 15% lower than for other existing buildings built to previous energy codes. When you do have a more recently built building and you don't quite meet the energy use intensity target that's 15% lower than the target for other existing buildings, but it is lower than the target for other existing buildings. So you're kind of set between the 15% lower and the regular target. There are options to pursue compliance through commissioning or recommissioning of the building in lieu of meeting that target. So take a look at those details. It's in section 4.3.2 if you have a newly constructed building that doesn't quite meet the target of 15% lower than the target for other existing buildings. This is an allowance to help provide a little bit of relief for those new building owners. In theory, a new building built under modern Washington State Energy Code would not have a problem meeting the energy use intensity target, but there may be some cases where it does not. So you can recommission the building if the building was built within 5 years of the compliance date. And if the building was built within 2 years of the compliance date, you can use the commissioning report form that was required for compliance with the Washington State Energy Code as evidence that the building was officially commissioned when obtaining the occupancy permit at time of final construction. For the investment criteria, we also have some updated commissioning allowances. Currently, the investment criteria requires that the building owner implement all cost-effective energy efficiency measures. And cost-effective effectiveness is deemed by Annex X of the standard. It's a life cycle cost analysis. Um, the measurement and verification or verification of compliance for this pathway is to obtain 75% of the estimated savings by that audit and life cycle cost analysis. If a building does not meet that 75% savings, currently you're required to reevaluate the audit and implement any new cost-effective energy efficiency measures to try to obtain that savings that was initially estimated in the level 2 audit. That cycle can kind of repeat until you meet those savings. So you could end up, and you're supposed to evaluate on an annual basis until you meet those minimum energy savings. The new allowance with these rules is to allow recommissioning of the building if you find that you don't meet 75% of those savings estimated. So in lieu of reevaluating EEMs and installing new EEMs, you can just recommission the building. Also, we have an allowance for a custom bundle of EEMs in lieu of the optimized bundle. So the optimized bundle is what the level 2 audit and the life cycle cost analysis deem to be cost-effective energy efficiency measures. If a building owner chooses, they can implement a custom bundle that equates to as much energy savings or more as was specified in the optimized bundle. This allows building owners to choose to implement EEMs that may have not been deemed to be cost effective, but they want to implement anyways for other reasons. So all we need to see is that the energy savings that was estimated in the optimized bundles is saved for the verification of compliance. The new alternative compliance pathways are the minimum energy use reduction pathway as well as a space heating electrification pathway. And I'm going to go into detail on those two pathways in the next two slides. Annalyn, you want to advance to the next slide? Okay, so minimum energy use reduction is a new compliance pathway. So we now have 4 performance targets in the standard. This is a new one. So you can find that in a new section, section 4.3.4. This pathway requires a reduction of the EUI, the weather normalized EUI, by 15% based off the baseline. And the baseline is 12 consecutive months of data that was creating the EUI within 5 years prior to the compliance date for the first cycle compliance. So for the 2026, 2027, and 2028 compliance dates for Tier 1 buildings, it would be based on within the 5 years prior to those compliance dates. For subsequent cycles, it would be based off of the EUI at the previous compliance date. So in 2031, for example, if you were to pursue this pathway, the baseline would be your EUI at time of compliance in 2026. There's also a provision in there for if the building had a change of building activity type, so the EUI-T changed during a cycle, the new baseline would be based on the new building activity type. With this pathway, buildings do need to perform at minimum an ASHRAE level 1 energy audit. It doesn't need to be a level 2 audit, but a level 1 audit is minimum, and this could include energy audits that are often provided by your energy utilities. some of our utilities here in the state provide subsidized um, energy audits, and that can be utilized in order to help develop the energy efficiency measures estimated to reduce the EY by 15%. And this performance target pathway is valid through the 2046 and 2048 compliance cycle. So in theory, a building owner can utilize this pathway each compliance cycle, or um, they could use maybe the investment criteria for the first cycle and find that it's more cost effective or more advantageous to utilize this minimum energy use reduction pathway in a subsequent cycle or cycles. Next slide. So the fourth and the second new alternative compliance pathway is the space heating electrification pathway. Found in section 4.3.5 of the standard. This pathway requires the replacement of existing fossil fuel consuming space conditioning equipment with an electric heat pump. This pathway, building owners do not need to perform an energy audit. They would just need to replace the space heating system with a heat pump that meets the heat pump needs to be sized appropriately to accomplish serving 90% of the annual space heating demand. So that allows for fossil fuel or electric resistance backup or supplementary heat for those hours of the year where the heat pump is not sized at a great enough capacity to meet the full load during those coldest hours. So it's most cost effective to size the heat pump so it meets most of the load, but not all of the load. So there is an allowance for supplemental and backup heat. Do want to point out that there are a few building activity types where this pathway is not allowed. That would be for supermarket, grocery store, building activity type, data centers, cold storage, refrigerated warehouse. These building activity types typically don't have a large enough heating load to make this pathway a meaningful way to reduce the energy use intensity in a building. However, if you do find that you have a building with these building activity types where you can still show that this pathway will reduce the EUI by at least 10 EUI, you can use this pathway. You just need to be documenting, and we would look for verification that the EUI was reduced by 10 EUI through this performance pathway. Next slide. Okay, new flow chart, just to kind of give you a visual idea of how these pathways work. We start up here in the upper left corner of the slide. First you can check to see if your building is exempt. We're not going to cover the exemptions in detail today, but we will talk about exemptions here in a few slides so you can get a better idea if you're new to the standard of what the exemptions look like. If the building is not exempt, you would need to calculate the energy use intensity of the building. Some buildings won't be able to calculate the EUI for various reasons. Often it's because they're master metered with other buildings. If you cannot measure EUI or choose not to submeter your building so you can measure EUI, or you choose not to pursue the connected building pathway, which allows you to create an EUI including other buildings, then your only options are the investment criteria, performance metric, or the space heating electrification. Again, I want to just reiterate that this is Tier 1 compliance, so Tier 2 folks don't have to worry about the performance target here. If you can measure the EUI, then your options increase. So, but you want to check to see if there's actually a target for the building. Most buildings will have an energy use intensity target, but some of them may not. Some building activities do not have targets, such as data centers. Therefore, if you do not isolate that portion of the building through submetering, you won't be able to create a target for the building. Um, those that cannot create a target are limited to compliance through the investment criteria, the minimum energy use reduction pathway, or the space heating electrification. You cannot meet an energy use intensity target if there is no target. So if the building can create a target, can create an EUI, then all four performance target pathways are available. So meeting the energy use intensity target, the investment criteria, the new minimum energy use reduction, or the space heating electrification pathways. Next slide. Okay, well, here's an opportunity. We're going to take about 5 minutes if there's questions from the attendees.
It's
Yeah,
Luke.
we, oh,
Go ahead, Jeff.
all right, yes. We do have a few questions relating to some of the information uh, both you and Annalyn spoke about. So this is going to be kind of a two-part question from two separate individuals. I'll start with for the 15% reduction in EUI pathway, does the building owner need to implement the EEMs identified in the audit to comply? And then I've got the second part here when you're ready.
Yeah, ideally that the audit's going to help inform how you can get that reduction in energy use. It may be that you find that there are other strategies to reduce the energy use. We're not going to be verifying that 15% reduction was based on the specific energy efficiency measures identified in the audit. We're just kind of want to see that 15% reduction. But the standard does require some sort of audit in order to identify those strategies. It could just be recommissioning of the building is enough to reduce the EUI by 15%. It could be that you found that implementation of your operations and maintenance program in the previous years has helped reduce the EUI from the previous compliance cycle enough.
Okay, great. Thanks, Luke. And I feel like you may have kind of answered this part of the second half of this question, but I'm going to ask it just for clarity. Um, the question is for the 15% energy reduction, will owners be able to submit for compliance as soon as they meet that 15% reduction, or do they need to hold that 15% reduction for at least 12 months?
So the 15% reduction needs to be verified within 2 years of the compliance date. So we had early compliance, which allowed you to comply with the standard prior to, sooner than 2 years, within 2 years of the compliance date. But since we are within 2 years of all the compliance dates, that's irrelevant. So for this cycle, as of today, it would need to be verified within 2 years of the compliance date. And then for subsequent cycles, it would be the same.
Okay, great.
Hey, Jeff, can
Yeah.
we address some of the basic questions that were answered, just in case they missed the beginning part of this? Most of this, the new rules do apply to Tier 1. However, Tier 2, it will apply eventually. You'll see in the next sections how we address the updates to how it will affect Tier 1 and Tier 2. So just keep an eye out on that. And then someone else asked, when will the revised document of the new rules be available? what we can provide sooner than later, after the CR 103 is um, filed, we will put what we call a red line version on our website, and that will have kind of you'll see the track changes. But the official clean version will come a little later. It's going to take some time for us to publish that, maybe a month for that. And we will be sure to announce it through our bulletin, have it on the website, and email those who have downloaded previous versions. So keep an eye out on that. And
Great.
then, I
Thanks.
don't know. Go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah, yeah. No, perfect. I appreciate that. And I think we've got time for one more, real quick. And Luke, just because you mentioned it in your response regarding the 15% reduction question, commissioning building details, can you offer a little bit of explanation, a brief explanation, or some context on what that means?
So commissioning and recommissioning is typically where a qualified person will go in and evaluate the equipment and systems in the building to optimize their performance for energy efficiency as well as occupant comfort. So whereas an energy audit might identify equipment and systems that are not efficient, the commissioning process actually tunes the equipment so that it is optimized. It's often in commercial buildings or in any building that equipment and systems kind of lose calibration over time and through wear and tear or just occupant behavior, they may change and lose spec essentially.
Okay. All right. Perfect.
Let's
Thank
just
you.
take one. Let's just take one more. I see there's a lot of questions.
Yeah. One more here. If we can again briefly explain the customized bundle EEMs versus the optimized bundle of EEMs.
Okay, so the investment criteria pathway requires that level two energy audit, which will identify energy efficiency measures. Um, the energy efficiency measures identified in the audit will then be passed through a life cycle cost analysis. That life cycle cost analysis identifies which energy efficiency measures are cost effective. So you may have a bundle of, let's say, 5 energy efficiency measures that are deemed to be cost effective. Those measures would then be considered the optimized bundle. The state does not require, through the Clean Buildings Performance Standard, implementation of any energy efficiency measures that aren't deemed to be cost effective. Normative Annex X of the standard outlines the requirements of how to make that calculation. So those 5 identified in this example, 8 energy efficiency measures would equate to a certain amount of energy savings, and that's all done in the calculation. The building owner can choose to, be required to implement the optimized bundle, or they can choose to maybe install different energy efficiencies. Maybe they'll install 4 of them, but they want to do this other one anyways. They're replacing something that wasn't deemed to be cost effective anyways for other reasons. They can implement that custom bundle, including the EEMs that they prefer to install in lieu of the optimized bundle, but that custom bundle needs to equate to equal to or greater energy savings as was determined by the life cycle cost analysis.
Perfect. Thanks, Luke. Appreciate that. And so I know we've got more questions coming in, and but we're going to pause on the questions there so we can move to the next part of our presentation. And just as a reminder, folks, if you've got questions, please drop those into the Q&A. We've got an amazing clean buildings team working behind the scenes to answer those questions as quickly as possible. So please drop those in the Q&A, and I'll turn the floor back over to you, Luke, and Annalyn.
I'll try not to drag these next sections on too long so that we can have time at the end of the presentation for more questions live. Updates, let's do exemptions. So section Y 4.1 and Z 4.1. Y 4.1 is where the exemptions live for tier 2 buildings, and Z 4.1 is where you'll find the exemptions for tier 1 buildings. Next slide. Okay, so you'll see this chart here. We have the categories, the specific exemption from Y 4.1 and Z 4.1. They are identified by letters A, B, C, D, all the way through F, I believe. The second column is how these updates relate to tier 1, and the third column is how the updates relate to tier 2. So as you can see with the 3 exemptions listed on this screen, these exemptions apply to both tier 1 and tier 2. So the big one that we're talking about here is that exemptions A through D can be additive. So they need to, if you have multiple categories here that within your building, and they equate in aggregate to equal 50% or more of the building square footage, you are likely eligible for exemption. So this is new, allowing this additive process to the standard, provides more flexibility and more understanding of exempt buildings. There are a few that, as noted on category C here, where if you have an exempt building, but you still have non-exempt space greater than 20,000 square feet, we do require that non-exempt space to comply with what we call compliance light, which is essentially the tier 2 requirements of the standard. So you'll notice that that bullet is not expressed for the tier 2 updates, but just for the tier 1s. So for example, if you have a building that's primarily unconditioned, but you do, let's say it's a 100,000 square foot building and more than half the building is unconditioned, but you do have semi-heated, or you do have a conditioned space within that building greater than 20,000 square feet, the unheated portion of the building would be exempt, but the heated portion of the building would need to comply with what we call the compliance light, which is benchmarking and implementation of the energy management plan and the operations and maintenance program. Next slide. So moving on, again, A through D, you can combine those exemptions. That's additive. We do want to point out that for manufacturing and industrial exemptions, we put some clarifying language in the standard based on House Bill 1543, that spaces within that manufacturing building that directly support the manufacturing or industrial space use can be included in the GFA aggregation for that building when looking at application for exemption. So you may find, for example, that a manufacturing or industrial space has a high hazard group H or factor group F occupancy for a majority or a portion of the building. However, not, you may have some warehouse or storage space that supports that manufacturing. So you manufacture the product and then you move it to another area of the building to store that product before distribution. So that's an example of that supporting space. Now, this only works if it's, let's say if you have a multi-tenant building where one tenant is manufacturing, the other one is not, and they're not related or supporting one another, then this uh, allowance does not apply. This is same for tier one. It's tier two. There are no changes to agricultural and demolition exemptions. They are not additive. Either you've got an agricultural building, it's not based on percentages of floor area, or you're either demoing a building or not. Financial hardship. There are some clarifying language added to the standard to help identify what financial hardship means in some cases, specific to K-12 schools and to public hospital districts. I don't know if you remember the definition slide that Lynn showed earlier. It has a new definition for what a public hospital district is. So if you're curious, you can find that in the new rules. You can see the language here just helps clarify what that financial hardship looks like. Next slide. There are two new exemption categories. One would be for national security in the rare case where a building activity and compliance with the standard would impair national security interests. There is a new exemption for that. That was something that was specifically stated in House Bill 1543. And we also have the compliance light pathway, which I mentioned earlier. This is applicable for buildings seeing extenuating conditions such as historic integrity. And if there's a significant loss in assessed value in a building since 2020, we all know that since COVID, a lot of these buildings are struggling to obtain full occupancy. Therefore, they have also lost some significant assessed value, or some of them have. If that is the case, and you can document that accordingly to the standard, then you would only be required to pursue compliance light, which again is benchmarking and implementation of the energy management plan, operations and maintenance program. And then I already talked about the non-exempt space here is associated with the first couple slides that I talked about, the additive exemptions, exemptions A through D. Requires, and lastly, I just want to reiterate that compliance light is the tier 2 requirements. Next slide. Okay, we can take a few minutes to answer some specific questions to exemptions.
Okay, thanks, Luke. So we've only had one question come in so far in regards to the extensions, exemptions conversation. And the question we have for you is asking if there is a threshold for a significant loss in assessed value.
Yeah, I wish on top of my head I had the details. Dylan, I see you got off mute. Can you help me out with this one?
Yes, absolutely. This, well, it's not a specific like percentage loss threshold. It's a loss, a significant loss that prevents building owners from securing capital in the form of loans against equity in the covered building. So it would be demonstrating that the loss was significant enough to prevent the secure the securing of capital.
So thank you, Dylan. I will point out that this is different than the regular financial hardship exemption because the regular financial hardship exemption is really taking a look at the debt capacity of the building owner and not the assessed value of a specific building in its ability as a singular building to um, obtain financing appropriate for meeting the compliance based on the building value.
Excellent.
So it could
Oh,
be Amazon, for example, that they've got plenty of debt capacity as a whole, as a business, but a specific building may not have the assessed value anymore.
okay. All right. So, Luke, we did have a couple more come in. I think they'll be pretty quick here. Um, and let's see, apologize, it moved on me. Regarding exemptions, could you repeat the new exemption for school districts and schools?
We can go back to that slide. It would be useful to see it. Um, so this is new details of the exemption. So it's talking about what specific situations constitute financial hardship for schools. So as you can see, failed bonds or levies, limited school district debt capacity, or actively correcting violation of state Board of Health rules. So this is just added language to provide clarity.
All right. Um, mention compliance light. Someone's asking if we can explain again who qualifies for compliance light.
So compliance light through these rules are limited to um, the exemptions that actually, if we go back up to the first of the exemption slides, I can point it out. Okay, so category C, the non-exempt space greater than 20,000 square feet. Let's say majority of the building is exempt, but you do have some non-exempt space greater than 20,000 square feet. Compliance light would apply there. And then would you go to the next slide? Um, and I believe that's the only one of those. Let's go down to the next slide. And then it would be historic buildings. So currently, as the rules are stated, the historic buildings, any energy efficiency measure that would compromise the historic integrity of a historic building would not need to be implemented. However, there may be rare cases where a historic building just compliance with the standard may jeopardize the historic integrity of a building. Let's say, for example, a building owner has a historic building that is in risk of being this is just a rare case, and I'm not sure how realistic this is, but for example, let's say we have a historic building and the building owner would choose to demo the building in lieu of meeting the clean buildings performance standard because it's more valuable property. It's with a different building on it. In that case, compliance light would all that would be needed for that building. And then, as Dylan noted, a significant loss in assessed value would be an allowance for compliance light.
Great. Thanks, Luke. So we do have a couple more, but I want to ask one more, being that we're on this slide, and then we can continue on here. You mentioned historic integrity, and someone's asking if what is required to verify historic integrity as an extenuating circumstance, or I'm sorry, an extenuating condition?
So it has to be uh, well, in particular to what I stated, I think it would need to be in an evaluation. The way the historic integrity uh, requirement um, currently reads is you need to have an evaluation by a historic preservation authority um, or historic preservationist, identifying it as an historic building or a building that's uh, can be considered a historic building. And then we can evaluate how your condition, whatever that is, would affect the historic integrity of the building. So you just need to have documentation of the specific condition. If you have questions, more deeper questions about that, I think that's something that we need to consider on a case-by-case basis that you need to reach out to us for. But if you look at, I think it's Form G in Annex Z of the standard, you'll find some details on how we deal with historic integrity through the standard.
Great. Thanks, Luke. And I know I said one more before, but this time I mean one more, because I think this one is extremely relevant and very important that I believe a lot of people are experiencing here. And the question is asking if a building is over 220,000 square feet and meets the facts of an unoccupied exemption, can they simply apply late exemption now after June 1st, or do they need to request an extension first under the new rules?
Yeah, that's a good question. Technically, you know, commerce is directed by the standard and by legislation to notify building owners who do not comply by the compliance state of notice of violation. That would then trigger them to respond within a designated amount of time that we would present in our notification to respond to us. If you have a valid exemption, we would accept that exemption. In most cases, we don't have the authority to say by a certain time frame, but we do have the authority to avoid um, uh, uh, requiring or a penalty within a certain amount of time, but there is no specific time frame. What we're considering is the extension, which I'm going to talk about in the next slides. Provisions of this rulemaking allows building owners to apply for extension within 6 months after the compliance date. So I think it's reasonable for us to say that if you apply for exemption and have an eligible exemption application approved within the 6 months of the compliance date, that if fines and penalties would not be assessed.
Great. Thanks, Luke. And I think that's a good segue to for the next topic here, unless I saw Anna Lynn come off mute.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. If you're a building greater than 220K and you do meet the qualifications of, or it's an unoccupied space, you should be able to apply for exemption now.
Nothing preventing you from that. You don't need a qualified person to do that. You do need documentation, 2 forms of documentation that the building is unoccupied. However, we have guidance documents on all our exemptions. So maybe someone can put that in the chat.
So someone informed us that the links in the chat are, people can access it. We will be emailing this to the registrant, so you'll have that. And again, to apply for these exemptions, you'll have to apply in the portal. So you'll need access to the portal. We'll also give you the request to access the portal. And for these new applications, we'll also put a link and share that link for an interest form. We will email you directly when these applications are available. Thanks, and we'll move on. Thank you.
Right, extensions. As you can see, you'll find them for Tier 2 buildings on Y 3.2 and Z 3.2 for the Tier 1 buildings. Next slide. So extensions were a big part of House Bill 1543. They were specifically noted in legislation that building owners can apply for these extensions 6 months prior, no sooner than 6 months prior to, and up to 6 months after the applicable compliance date. So if you're a Tier 2 building over 220,000 square feet, you may or may not know that June 1st, so the beginning of this month, was the compliance date for you. You have up to 6 months to apply for an extension after that date in order to obtain those extensions and avoid possible penalty. So there are several categories for the extensions. You're going to meet the provisions of what we call beyond control. So natural disasters prevented you from complying with the standard. This has to be a natural disaster that was declared by a governmental authority. Goods and services shortages causing delays, price changes and energy efficiency measures affecting cost effectiveness. Maybe you have implemented all the required EEMs, but you have less than 12 months of data or time since you implement those EEMs to verify compliance. For Tier 2, it only affected by the natural disasters of goods and services. Again, Tier 2 does not require a performance target be met. Change of ownership. So if you've purchased a building within 12 months prior to the compliance date, you'd be eligible for an extension of 2 years. I will note that these are one-time extensions for Tier 2 buildings. For Tier 1 buildings, you can actually obtain a 2-year extension, and then you may be eligible for another 2-year extension renewal. So a total of 4 years, you may be eligible for Tier 1 buildings. Next slide. There may be some financial restrictions you're having that would make you eligible for extension, such as financial hardship affecting cash flow. Maybe you have an existing capital improvement plan and a schedule to implement it in order to meet the UI2 investment criteria, and you need an extension to verify compliance. Active or recent construction that has prevented you from acquiring the energy data required to document that you're meeting the compliance. Let's say you meet the energy use intensity targets, but you haven't implemented the energy management plan and operations and maintenance programs yet. You need a little extra time to develop and implement them. That would be a condition that would make you eligible for a 2-year extension. And then lastly, this is kind of a catch-all. If you benchmark the building and implement the energy management plan, the operations and maintenance program by the compliance date, or in 6 months after the compliance date, and apply for extension within 6 months after the compliance date, we will be able to grant you an extension to complete the performance target requirements of the standard. Again, this is not available for Tier 2 because Tier 2 does not have a performance target requirement. I'll skip back up to the one before the EMP and O&M one. If you need a little more time for a tier two building to implement and develop the EMP and O&M, if you benchmark your building, that would be an eligible uh, process for gaining extension for tier two buildings. Next slide. All right, specific questions, extensions would be great.
There we go. Yes, we've got a few of them coming in here, Luke. I think a big one that everyone's going to be asking here is when will the extension application be available?
Lynn, do you want to answer that one?
Sure. Right now, it is not available. We will send you the interest form. When is it available? We are hoping to have it mid-July. Um, the portal developers are working on it right now. With anything that's being developed, it can change, but for the most part, we are scheduling it for early to mid-July. You will have to wait for the announcement.
You mentioned the interest form. Can you talk a little more about that?
So there's an interest form that we have where you can fill it out. You'll just have your basic information, your name, your email address. There's a drop down menu of what you'd be interested in knowing when these applications are available. Those are the compliance pathways, the extension applications, and new exemption applications, all of these new ones. You can select all three, and we will email you directly and let you know that these applications are available. It's not an exclusive list. We will be announcing it in a bulletin, so the world will know. You'll get an email directly, and it will be on our website. And that link to that interest form will be shared to all the registrants so look out for the email. Jeff usually sends a follow-up email with the recording, the slide deck, and the pertinent links that we shared. So look out for that.
Excellent. Thanks. Thank you both. Um, Luke, just kind of looping back to the last um, piece that you were talking about on extensions, and just want to reiterate this. But the question is, if we apply for an extension to ensure that we meet the EUI, do we still need to implement the EMP and the O&M prior to compliance date, even if we require an extension? Or we would just be able to implement them along with the extension dates?
Yeah, so if you do meet the energy use intensity target and you want an extension for the EMP and the O&M, regardless of whether you benchmarked or not, you can be eligible for an extension. If you don't meet the energy use intensity target and you have not benchmarked or implemented the EMP and the O&M, you would not be eligible for an extension through that category, either the EMP and O&M category or the performance target category. We're hoping that the 6 months period between, let's say your compliance date was June 1 of 2026, we're hoping that this 6 months of application for exemption, you can get the benchmark in the EMP and the O&M program implemented in order to qualify for these extensions for the performance target.
Okay, great. So a couple more, but I'm going to touch on this one here real quick. If we can just confirm that extensions are only for tier one buildings, is that correct?
Extensions are available for tier 1 and tier 2 buildings.
Okay, so both tier one and tier two.
Yep. Now, some of the extension eligibility requirements are not relevant to Tier 2 because they don't have a performance target. So if you look on here, Tier 2, like if there's a declared natural disaster, Tier 2 builders could be eligible for exemption just based on that. That's not currently in effect, but it could happen. Change of ownership, same as Tier 1. So if you just obtained a building within the last 12 months, that is Tier 2 building, that would make you eligible for an extension.
Okay.
Just to clarify, I know it says Tier 1 only. This is Tier 1 only for that one-time extension renewal. So Tier 1 can request for another extension, but that doesn't apply to Tier 2.
The
Also
renewal
to
part is the
Renewal
important
part, yeah.
Also to clarify, the extensions are only available 6 months prior to the compliance date, so they're not available for Tier 2 until next year, January 1st.
You can't apply for an extension until no sooner than 6 months prior. Thank you, Judy.
All right. So some of the scenario context that brought this question up is saying that if a building is experiencing financial hardship and pursues an extension, they receive it one time, but will be required to comply in the following cycles, even if financial hardship conditions persist. And I think
Well,
that may
yeah,
go ahead.
if financial hardship realities persist, you would probably be eligible for an actual exemption and not just an extension. The idea is if you have financial hardship, but you just need a little more time in order to be able to uh, get your financial uh, resources together to comply with the standard. That would be the objective with the extension rather than an exemption.
Okay. And Luke, I know we've got a couple more topics to touch on too, but I'm seeing kind of a trend in this one question. So I'm going to essentially summarize a few questions together that are essentially asking that if they submitted for compliance, but it needed additional information, and there's no specifics of what that additional information is, but that was the response that they received. Um, and should they go ahead and continue obtaining that information and getting it to meet compliance, or is it better to file or submit for an extension at that point?
Yeah, I think it's, and I'll get the opinions of the rest of the crew, but I think, if you're in doubt of apply for extension if you're not able to meet the compliance date.
Hey, Luke, let me
Yeah.
jump in. So I
Yeah.
think this was specific to an application that was submitted by the compliance reporting date,
Okay.
and it got sent back for additional information, which
Yeah.
case we consider when you originally submitted that application to be your submittal date. So there's no need to submit for an extension for that.
Thanks, James.
All right. Luke, I'll go ahead and turn it back over to you because I know we do have a couple other topics to touch on today.
Okay. We'll finish up with the questions here and we have time. Okay, so this is other notable updates. Why don't you go to the next slide? There are a plethora of changes that we didn't cover specifically today, even beyond this list here, but these are some of the major ones. We did a lot of cleanup, reorganizing and titling of the rules, hopefully making it more clear when you read through the standard to understand it. We've kind of, with the new compliance pathways, we've kind of had to veer away from the original ASHRAE standard 100 formatting to make it more clear. Of course, we've also had to change some of the language to address that. Judy developed informative Annex B, which was mentioned by Annalyn at the beginning of the presentation. This is really just developed to help organize people's thoughts and understanding of how the standard works and the different compliance pathways. Another big one is the operations and maintenance program for the Tier 1 buildings is currently required to be implemented a year prior to compliance date. It is now only required to be implemented by the compliance date, just like Tier 2 buildings has always been. So that's a significant change. We do have a new form for the space seating electrification. So if you're compliant through that pathway, look for Form E. It's got all the details of how to document compliance with that pathway. And lastly, on this slide, we've added a few more building activity types that are eligible to comply for compliance at a campus level. That would be senior care communities, hotels, and multifamily housing. So you can see those details in footnote 9 in table 7-1, 7-2A, and 7-4. Next slide on Lynn.
This goes back to Jeff. Take it away, Jeff.
Okay. So support and resources. I think we mentioned at every webinar that the Clean Buildings team is here to help, and there's a variety of ways that we offer our assistance and guidance. And as we mentioned throughout this presentation, we have several upcoming training webinars coming up. If we can go back to that slide there. There we go. And so here's our list of training webinars that we have coming up. Obviously, after today, tomorrow, there's the QEM training put on by Building Potential and the Smart Building Center. And we'll, of course, send that link as well as the rest of these links out to everyone after today's meeting. And then, as you can see, we've got the today's webinar, and then we'll update our Clean Buildings 101 presentation with the new rules, and then dive into the specifics of the new rules, such as extensions, exemptions, and the different compliance pathways. So be on the lookout for those webinar registrations, and please mark your calendars once you register. We'll go to the next slide here. All right. And again, our Clean Buildings team is here to help. You can see here on this form from our website, we have our customer support form. That is honestly the easiest way to connect with our Clean Buildings team with your questions that come up. When you open that form, it actually breaks it out that if it's something more technical assistance or portal related, you've got those options to submit directly to those teams there. That usually provides a quicker response to your question at that point. You can always email us as an alternative. And then additionally, we have our monthly Clean Buildings Performance Standard office hours. This is another great time to connect with our Clean Buildings team. And this happens on the fourth Tuesday of every month at 10 a.m. For roughly about an hour. And again, our buildings team will share a few updates and then really open the floor to those in the room. And this is a great time to bring those questions, scenarios, and so forth to our team and allow us to walk you through those. Utility accelerated programs are out there. Definitely check with your local utility provider. Smart Building Center, Building Potential, same folks that are putting on the QEM training, offer a no-cost support help desk and free tool lending library as well. So we encourage you to utilize that resource. And then Energy Star Portfolio Manager, of course, has a great customer support option and additional trainings as well. And then the last thing I'll mention on that slide, Annalyn brought up the Clean Buildings Bulletin. If you're not subscribed to our Clean Buildings Bulletin, please go to our website and submit and subscribe. This is where we're going to blast out any updates that we have regarding the Clean Buildings Performance Standards and where you get the information the quickest. And with that, I believe we've got questions coming up next here. Perfect. All right. So, Luke, I know you mentioned this, but I want to just really highlight the answer to this again, just because we do receive so many questions on this. But in the notable updates section, you mentioned that the tier twos and regarding the implementing the O&M 12 months prior. So can we just clarify, do tier two buildings still need to have implemented the O&M 12 months prior to the compliance date?
Oh, what I didn't communicate clearly was the tier two buildings never had to implement it 12 months prior. They've always been required to implement it by the compliance date. So what we're doing is just aligning the tier one requirement with the tier two. Tier one previously, or in the current version of the rules, requires O&M to be implemented a year prior to the compliance date. That is going away with these new rule changes.
Hey, Luke, can I just jump in one quick thing on that?
Mhm.
So it would be by the compliance reporting date or whenever you're actually submitting for compliance, you
Right.
need to demonstrate implementation.
Yeah. So if you're applying a year prior to compliance date, you need to demonstrate that the O&M program is in compliance with the standard and implemented. You can't say, well, it will be by the time the compliance date comes along. We won't give you a compliance approval until we have documentation that the O&M has been implemented.
Okay. Great. Um, I'm just looking at our list here to make sure I didn't miss anything related to the resources or the notable updates.
I do want to note real quick that for tier two, I didn't mention this, but we used to have a conditional compliance pathway for tier two. The extension requirements replaces that. So the conditional compliance is no longer valid for tier two because extensions is actually a more streamlined pathway to essentially accomplish the same thing. And you may find that for tier one, extensions are much more easy to apply for than conditional compliance. And so conditional compliance may not be as useful for tier one as they once had.
All right. Now, Luke, if it's okay, we've got several questions that are kind of involve many of the topics that we covered today. Yeah, looking at this one's saying for proof of O&M implementation. Well, I'll go ahead and ask it here. For proof of O&M implementation, what are the acceptable forms of proof? If invoices are provided, should they have full description and service completed, or will general description be acceptable?
Well, I will first by stating that preventive maintenance does not meet the intent of the operations and maintenance program, or excuse me, work orders are not documentation of preventative maintenance. And operations and maintenance program is all about preventative maintenance. So if you do have, let's say, a service contract with let's say an HVAC contractor that does regular preventative maintenance on your building, you can utilize that as documentation for that portion of the operations and maintenance program. James, Donnie, you may want to add to that.
Yeah, I would just say so things like screenshots of completed preventative maintenance work orders, whether they're electronic through like a building automated system or CMMS, or even like just photocopies of paper logs are sufficient. Again, like Luke was mentioning, it's really key to make sure these are preventative maintenance tasks and not trouble calls or reactive maintenance. Signed service contracts are also sufficient. I think this really applies a lot to tier two buildings, particularly, especially multifamily, where there may be a third party vendor who's conducting all the preventative maintenance. So provide a copy of that signed service contract. It should include some detail of like the scope of work. Things like air filter replacements are really common. I think what we've seen from some of the existing compliance applications, but just something that demonstrates that the preventative maintenance is occurring on a regular frequency.
Wonderful. Thank you, Luke, and thank you, James, on that one. Um, Luke, we're going to go back to extensions here, and question came in saying for buildings over 220,000 square feet that just started the process of compliance. At this point, doesn't sound like there's no benchmark done yet, no O&M, no EMP, and none of the extension options shown earlier apply. Is there another option for the owner to apply for an extension? So I'm clear.
We don't have any other like a you need to have meet one of the specific categories for eligibility for extension. The intent is that benchmarking, energy management plan and operations and maintenance program development and implementation within the 6 months of application, 6 months of the compliance date would be enough time for building owners to get that work done in order to be eligible for the extension. We don't have any others allowances in the rules for anything that's more lenient than that.
Okay. Right. All right. On the topic of extensions, question came in earlier saying if a tier one property is past its due date but granted an extension, is it eligible for the early adopter incentive?
You repeat that again, Jeff? It's
Yeah, you bet.
beyond.
If the tier one property is past its due date but is granted an extension, is it eligible for the early adopter incentive?
No, the tier one early adopter incentive needs to be applied for. I think it's is it 2 years prior to the compliance date? So is that correct, Annalyn?
It's a year. It's 1 year.
1 year. Yeah. So if you haven't even applied for the early adopters incentive 1 year prior to the compliance date, then you're not eligible for early adopter incentive. So it's irrelevant whether the extensions are valid or not.
Just add to that. That's for tier one. For tier two, you can apply for incentives as long as there's funding available up until 2030, I believe.
Thank you for the clarification.
Right.
So tier one, no. Tier two, yes.
All right. And let's see, exemptions. Does an exemption carry forward to future compliance cycles? And maybe if you don't mind, Luke, maybe we can add the extension onto that too. So do exemptions or extensions?
Exemptions do not carry forward to the next compliance cycle. So each compliance cycle is 5 years. So you would need to reapply for an exemption if it still exists in subsequent cycles. Building activity changes, so exemptions may no longer apply, or just the general conditions of the exemption may not apply in 5 years. So you got to re-up it. And then with extensions, the max extension is only 4 years. So it's it certainly does not carry forward to other cycles.
Okay, great. Thanks, Luke. And
Hey,
we,
Jeff,
yes.
we're at our scheduled time. I
Hmm.
just want to wrap it up and then, but we'll stay a little bit for questions for the
Okay,
purpose. Okay.
perfect. So yes, so we are at time 11 o'clock, and so we do know some people need to step away. Just as a reminder, this meeting was recorded, and we will get the recording out to everyone, as well as the PowerPoint slides, and then the resources that we shared throughout the presentation. We will also email out as well. So again, appreciate everyone being here, joining us today, and certainly look forward to connecting at the next webinar that we have coming up soon. So thank you everyone for attending, and we will connect again soon. Thank you.
Okay, we can continue with questions. I just wanted to close out the recording.